Hey rail fans, welcome. This video we're going to do a product review, and this is of the new Scale Trains SD40-2. Went ahead and got two of these, both of them in Burlington Northern, and so we're going to go ahead and look at the details on this engine. We'll check out the pulling power of it and do a little bit of comparison to actual Burlington Northern SD40-2s. We'll also listen to the LokSound decoders that come with these engines. So with that, let's go ahead and head over to the layout and we'll get on with the unboxing. Now, both of the SD40-2s that I got are in Scale Train's Rivet Counter line, and both of them are equipped with DCC sound by ESU LokSound. Scale Trains may win the award for having the widest manual in model trains, but gives a nice explanation of some of the DCC functions and things. All in all, the engine was well packed, well secured, didn't have any issues with it. One thing to note is on the underside of the trucks, there are two little plastic tabs that you need to remove before running your engine. And one item to note, throughout this review, as I mentioned, I purchased two engines, and so you'll see photographs of sort of both road numbers. Sometimes I'm photographing and shooting 7068 and sometimes 7054, but both engines look the same and perform the same, except where I note some differences later on. Straight out of the box, I found the engine performed really well. The slow speed performance of this engine is outstanding. It really crawled forward. Even at speed step 1, when it was only going 1 scale mile an hour, there was no jerkiness or hesitation or anything. And that is really fantastic that it can go that slow and be that smooth. I found top speed of this engine to be just a little bit faster than the EMD's actual SD40-2 top speed of 65 miles an hour. The model came in at 71 miles an hour, but that's really not an issue because you can adjust that with by limiting the top speed. In addition to its great slow speed performance, I found the engine had no problem negotiating any of the points on my layout. Here you can see going through my standard set of switches, going back and forth. This is a number 6, a number 7, and a number 8 switch. These are all InsoFrog switches, and there's no interruption of sound, speed, or lights as it goes through the switches. It tracks out very well. And when going backwards through the switches, same thing, tracked out really well, no interruption of anything, no pops or clicks in the sound, and all the lights were nice and steady, and the engine was just flawlessly smooth through the switches. And now moving over to the other side of the layout, here it is going through a Wathers double crossover, again with insulated frogs, no issues or concerns. And then usually have them drive down and go through the ladder tracks a little bit, and again, nice smooth operation. One of the great things about this locomotive is that Scale Trains has put a keep alive capacitor inside the train. So that's one of the things that helps out with this nice smooth performance through all these switches and things. And that the engine can actually lose power for about 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, and it stores enough power on board that it can continue to run and make sound even with that power interruption. So here you can see a little demonstration of that. I'll lift it off the rails as it goes past, and you can still hear it running. And the ESU LokSound decoder that comes with these engines is already equipped with their new full throttle software. And so the decoder is already all set, and you can use those full throttle features right out of the box. And if you're not exactly sure what full throttle is, go ahead and click on the link here, and that's my video explanation of the ESU LokSound full throttle. I found pulling power of the engine to be excellent. On my layout, a single engine could pull 36 cars. That was a mostly level track. There was a small section of 1% grade of about 3 feet long. But other than that, it was going through about 180 degrees of curve, which added some resistance. But still, pulling 36 cars is very respectable. So now that we've looked at the performance, let's go ahead and check out the details of this engine as we listen to the ESU LokSound decoder go through its paces. Now, before I cover some of the specific details and paint on the engine and what I liked, and even some of the things I didn't like about the engine, let's go ahead and talk a little bit first about the actual Burlington Northern SD40-2s. Production on SD40-2s began in January 1972 and continued until October 1989. Burlington Northern ended up owning over 800 of the SD40-2s, of which they acquired all of these between 1972 and 1980. Burlington Northern engine numbers 754 and 768, which are the two I purchased, were built 1 month apart in June and July 1978, respectively. All in all, I think Scale Trains did an excellent job on these Rivet Counter SD40-2s. I do have a couple issues with them that I want to go ahead and tell you about. But first, let me go ahead and tell you all the things that I really like about the engine. And because there are a lot of things that Scale Trains got right, and this is really a very good engine and a very good model of the Burlington Northern SD40-2s. Now, I won't cover every detail on the engines here and won't talk about everything they got right because they got so many things right. But just I want to point out a couple things that really caught my eye as being great. The first of which is, if you notice on the roof, there are two different size of lift rings on there, which is correct and accurate for the SD40-2s. But instead of just putting one size lift ring across the top of the engine, they actually put the smaller lift rings where the smaller ones should be and the larger ones where the larger ones should be. And I think that it really stands out. You can see the different sizes from just a glance at the engine. You can tell that that detail is there, and I think that's really neat. The working classification lights are also really good. They're nice and bright, and you can toggle them using F5 between off, white, green, and red. And since these are late 80s models, most of the engines would have still had the classification lights in them, even though railroads were phasing them out and not using them anymore, or phasing them out and have stopped using them by the 90s. And if you're wondering what the different colors mean, when the classification lights were used, the white was for an extra train that was not on the timetable. Green was for a regular scheduled train that was traveling according to the timetable, and red was for an engine that was at the end of a train. Another thing that I thought was very noticeable was just how crisp most of the details are. The details along the side of the engine and the long hood are very nice and crisply molded, and they took the paint really well. And Scale Trains actually did an excellent job, I think, of matching the Burlington Northern Cascade green color, which is one of those odd railroad colors that sort of changed color over time because it faded so much in the sun. And so some manufacturers seem to have a hard time getting that color right, and I think they did an excellent job of matching the Cascade green, and they did a really good job matching the handrail color to the color on the side of the locomotive. The colors, to my eye, appear exactly identical, which is another really good job on Scale Trains. However, while the handrails were a very good color, and I didn't have any problems with any of them being wavy, they were all nice and straight, and all of the stanchions were properly seated and nice and vertical, there was sort of a wispy plastic thread, almost like hair, along all of the handrails on both engines. And there are these little wispy plastic pieces that sort of like leftover flashing or something. And so I'm going to have to go through and carefully remove all that without damaging the handrails. And it is kind of noticeable when you look at the engines. You can see all these little, it looks like dust and hairs, but it's not. It actually is pieces of plastic that are remnants, I guess, from mold lines or something, where the handrails were made, that there's all these little pieces of kind of hair-like plastic coming off the handrails. One item I will point out, even though it's really minor, is that all four of the cab shades on my two engines were sort of at different angles. And even though they can actually be adjusted and stuff on the prototype, so they're not always at the same angle, for me, I actually like them being at the same angle on the left and right side of the locomotive, or else I think it kind of looks odd. So real easy to adjust, just sort of have to bend them into place, but just another little thing I had to do. But overall, really minor thing. I mentioned earlier about the two different size lift rings and how I really liked them. I did have one of the smaller lift rings on one engine that was bent and kind of pushed over. You can see it here. And then I had another one on the other engine where there was something sort of filling in the inside of the loop of one of the larger lift rings. And so I'll just have to probably drill that out or pop it out with a real small drill bit. Should be an easy fix. One thing I will need to fix that's going to be a little bit harder, though, is the one of the cab shades did have sort of a large blob of glue on it. on one of the cab shades on 7054, and you can see it here. And so I'm going to have to try and take that down and then repaint that area because it is kind of noticeable. Another thing I'm going to have to touch up is both engines at one different spot on the end of the handrails where they've painted them white, which is, for most part, it's nice and opaque and really good. But on both engines in one spot, some of that had flaked off already, and so I'll have to go back and touch that up. Now on one of the engines, there was some noticeable white paint between the long hood and the deck plate on the rear of the locomotive. And it's pretty prominent. You can see it here of there's sort of a white line there. So I'll have to touch that up with a little bit of black paint. The engine is seated down properly. I mean, it's not like it needs to be popped in place. It's just the masking there got messed up or something. Additionally, there's a line of Cascade green along the top of one of the engines, just sort of ahead of where the dynamic brake blister is. You can see it there. Again, the masking or something got messed up here, and so I got this Cascade green stripe along the top of one of the engines. So I'll have to touch that up. And sort of speaking of masking, both engines kind of have problems around the cabs and the number boards and the front light, in that they seem to be really crudely masked off, and there's several areas of white where the black paint has either been scratched off or wasn't painted properly. You can see here around the front light on 7068, it's not a nice crisp line at all. It's very crude, and there's white on both number boards, both for 7068 and 7054 have white on them, and so it kind of detracts from the look of the cab when you've got all these sort of rough edges of paint. It's not nice and crisp like it should be. Additionally, you can see some Cascade green underneath the rotary beacon on both engines. And in continuing to look at the top of the cab, there are sort of some lines along the top of the cab. There's one that goes all the way across, and there's two that are underneath the rotating beacon. And I think these are prototypical, but to me they're very overscaled, because when you go back and look at shots that you can see the roof detail, even with this antenna combination in the late 80s, you don't really see a large prominent line or series of lines like that on the top of the cab. So it's probably prototypical, but I think it is just a little bit overscaled. And sticking with looking at the cabs, along the roof, the firecracker antennas on the engines, they sort of have a big blob of glue where they're attached. It's not nice and clean looking. Additionally, where the air horn connects into the roof of the cab, there sort of were some scratches or marks, kind of thing, like it didn't initially get put down properly, and it kind of scratched and rubbed off some of the paint. Now, turning the attention to the trucks, overall pretty good. I do have two issues with them, though. The detail on them is fantastic, but on one of them, the paint has sort of been scraped off one small portion of it. Should be pretty easy to touch up, but sort of yet again another area on these engines that are brand new that I've already got to touch up. However, there's a much bigger problem with dealing with the sand lines. On both of my engines, all of the sand lines, every sand line that's on every truck of both engines, was out of position and was interfering with the swing of the trucks. They actually would hit the wheels and hit the side frames as the trucks moved in there. And even going around the large radiuses on my layout, which are 26-inch radiuses, you could hear them clicking and hitting. And so here you can see how they hit and catch on the flanges and on the side frames of the wheels and the side frames of the trucks. Now the good thing is I did not notice this interfering with the engine's performance at all. During all of my tests, it never derailed, never got hung up on anything. But you can hear it clicking as it goes around curves. And even with the sound on, you can still hear, or at least I can still hear, the plastic clicking on the side frames. Now, even with those issues I talked about, I do have to commend Scale Trains about their attention to detail. And this is really an excellent looking engine. And I really like the fact that they have made multiple eras of the same locomotives. The two I purchased were for the late 80s era. But for an earlier era, I could have purchased two other road numbers that had modeled specific details for earlier than the late 80s. And even the two late 80s era engines that I got were not completely identical in that 754 has a serviced in Havre, Montana sticker on the nose and on the side sill, whereas 7068 does not. Interestingly, though, in my research of the two specific road numbers they did, is I could find pictures of 7068 with the Havre, Montana sticker on the nose like that, but I could not find one of 7054 with it on there. Doesn't mean that Scale Trains isn't right. I just couldn't verify that the details they've got for that match those road numbers. And with both the engines, Scale Trains has got the right rotary beacon, horn, and antenna combination on the cab for the late 80s in these road numbers. If you do want to learn more about the Burlington Northern's SD40-2s, I highly recommend Burlington Northern Power in Color Volume 3 by Stephen Timko. Alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up my review of this Scale Trains Rivet Counter SD40-2 with ESU LokSound. Overall, I found it to be a fantastic engine, excellent puller. Lots and lots of details on it, all the way down to road number specific details. However, there definitely were some fit and finish kind of issues in there that can't be overlooked. So, I hope you found this review useful. I hope it helps inform your purchasing decisions in the future. And as always, until the next video, keep running your trains, keep enjoying them, and we'll catch you at the next update.